Right, here we go then. Welcome to part 5 of this beginning Blender series. This one now is going to be an introduction to animation. Quite a complex topic really. Hell of a lot to learn when it comes to animation. So this is just going to be a little overview of the techniques, tools and various other information of how you go about animation basically, and then we'll talk about the industry, some of the history. Be sure to download the PDF again. So some really good information in there. So yeah, let's start this intro to animation one then. So as with any aspect of art really, you know, you'll never stop learning animation. So it's quite a complex subject, a lot to it. And 3D animation has really become popular the last sort of 20 years really. You know, the rise of 30 years really. Toy Story, I believe, was 1993. And that was really the start of the 3D animation era. And then obviously you've got, you know, companies like Rockstar Games, stuff like that. GTA. They're really taking off with the 3D. But I mean, there's more information about that and the history of it in the PDF file. So there's a free download for that in the description. So what we'll do here, we'll just go into the techniques really in Blender. So let's turn this camera off for now, turn this light off. So basically, when you, where's my Epic pen? There it is. So when you're in Blender, the main thing you'll use is your auto key and your setting keys for an animation. So if this was going to be like going into a game engine or a film or something, you'd refer back to our last episode where you'd rig, you'd add a bone system. But what we'll do in a bit, we'll import R2 and the Minecraft character probably and carry out a little animation. I may possibly do the bouncing ball, but because that's really an important part of animation. A lot of concepts and principles in the bouncing ball. But I may save that just for a separate video in the future. Depends on the time, as I say. No longer than an hour and a half for these tutorials. And then when I go to, in the future, when I'm doing like on the fly stuff like sculpting and animating, I'm probably going to be looking at 20, 30, 40 minutes for them. But obviously these first ones, the most important ones, they will be longer. So let's move that box to 1. We'll go to Control A, all transforms. Pivot points down at the bottom there. So yep, there's our cube. And generally, it's best to enable auto key when you're animating. And it's this little button here. And it's in your timeline. You've got your dope sheet, your timeline, and your graph editor. And those three are basically the most important things when you're animating. Timeline, dope sheet, and graph editor. So if you don't enable auto key, you can hit I. Now, have you noticed how that's now gone the yellow colour? By hitting I, it means insert. You've inserted a keyframe. Let's undo that for now. So you can set a certain length for how many frames you want. And if you look over here in the output properties, generally you'll work in 24 frames per second. And that's really the default for film, TV, games. Not so much games, but definitely TV, and I believe TV is 25 frames a second, but film on the big screen, 24 frames a second. And I've always worked to that, personally, 24. So what that means is there's 24 frames along here. So that'll be a second of animation. So if you hit spacebar or hit the play button, your animation will play. So it says anim player there. So your animation's playing. But obviously we've got nothing keyed yet. So the general workflow for animation is you'll set keyframes. So if we enable auto key there, we move this slightly, you'll see that your location has changed. So even if you set that back to 0, you've still got your key. And if you open this little arrow here, you'll see you've got an X, Y and Z location, and you've got your yellow dots. So that means you've got a keyframe if you've got your yellow dots in your timeline. So let's move to frame 25, and let's just move that in the X-axis, the cube. So you can now see, if we press play, that cube's moving from frame 1 to frame 25. So you've got your 2 keyframes there now. It's just going to keep repeating. Once he gets to frame 25, it'll loop back to frame 1 and your animation will repeat. So that's the basic way of how you're going about setting keyframes in Blender. Be aware, if you've got auto key and you move stuff, it's always going to key. It's only going to key what you've moved. For example, Z, X, Y. If you hit I in the viewport, you'll get a key on everything. And that's generally the best way I find to work. Have a key on everything so you know where you stand. Some people would probably disagree with that, and they just say key what you're moving. But I just find it more cleanly, just have a key on everything, even if you're not going to use that key. So hit I again, I. And you can also hit I in your timeline panel. And by hitting I in your timeline panel, you're bringing up insert keyframe, and you can have it on all channels, only your selected channels, or in an active group. You'll generally use all channels or only selected channels there. So that's the basics of setting a keyframe, that is, in Blender. So what about if you wanted that cube to move up a little bit instead of just going straight? Well, you're in auto key. Move it up in the Z axis. And it's only keyed your Z axis. So if you press I, it's keyed them all. So now if you go, these controls here, by the way, you can go forward a frame to your key. You can play the animation in reverse. You can go to the start, go to the end. So that's your play controls there. So if we press play now, you can see that you've got a keyframe in the middle as well. And if you use the arrow keys on your keyboard, your arrow key heading that way, if you press it, you'll go to your next frame. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But if you hit the up arrow key, you'll go to your next keyframe. Down arrow will go back to your previous keyframe. Go to the arrow controls, very useful. I use them all the time. Known as flipping keys, that is. So yeah, use your arrow keys to flip keys. So if we just press the space bar on that now, and leave it to play, let's just analyse that. We've got our start frame there, our end frame there. This is showing the current frame. And it's moving in what's known as a Bezier transformation, smoothly, not linearly. It's not moving linear. And that's to do with your graph editor really, which we're going to go and have a look at now. So that's your timeline. Very important for setting your keyframes and your golden poses if you're doing character animation. So your timeline. Dope sheet is your next thing. And you'll see it's pretty much the same as the timeline, your dope sheet, where it's used a lot for example, you could select all your keys there and you could move it backwards, which means it's happening faster. So the first bit there is happening fast and then it's going slowly. So fast and then slowly. And that's to do with timing, which is the principle. That's one of the 12 principles of animation, timing is. And timing and spacing are probably the most important aspects of animation. They're all obviously important, all 12 rules, but timing and spacing probably the most important of the lot. So yeah, dope sheet, very useful for moving your keys around. So if you move it to there, you'll go slow to start and fast. There, because it's longer, it's a longer time period. There. And it's a shorter time period there because of the frames. Less frames basically, there's less frames. There's more frames there. The traditional animators use a timing chart. So if you've got a start and an end, so your frame 1 and your frame 25, end. It's kind of like this kind of thing, a timing chart. So you're going quicker there, quicker because there's more frames. Whereas here, it's quite even. It's an even spacing. You've got your timing, and this here is your spacing. All about the timing and spacing. I'm sure it was Milt Kahl who said that. Very old Walt Disney animator. So yeah, we can move in the dope sheet, move stuff about. So setting it back to 13 where it was originally. That'll give you your even timing. An important aspect of animation is arcs. So if you come over to Object Properties, you've got motion paths there. So if you hit Calculate there, it'll give you a motion path. And that's really useful for tracking your arcs, for example. So like everything moves in an arc when it comes to animation. unless it's like a robot or something linear moving, but in the most part, principle number 7, arcs. And I think timing, spacing and arcs are probably the most important 3. Timing and spacing first, then arcs. Super important. Pleasing to the eye, creating appeal with an arc. You can notice there that that cube's moving in an arc. So let's stop that. And let's go and have a look into the graph editor. This is probably the most important thing of all when it comes to polishing and editing your animation. So we had dope sheet, timesheet, timeline, sorry, timesheet, graph editor. So you select your object and you'll bring up what's known as animation curves there. And if you hit that arrow, you'll get values for each of your set channels. So let's just hide that. Actually, we'll keep that path open for now. So there's our 3D viewport, our motion path. And there's our graph editor. You've got options here to do different things. If you go to show cursor, I like to turn that off because it gives, like, you see the blue there, the blue line. You don't need that because you've got your blue line there for your Z. It's a bit confusing, so turn your cursor off. I also like to use only selected keyframe handles, so it only shows the handles. You've got these tangent handles there. If you go to only selected, it'll only show the handles of the selected ones. Right, so it can be really daunting at first, the graph editor. And I'm going to do a complete tutorial in the future, going over a whole lesson on the graph editor. I'm just touching on the basics for now. Basically, the graph editor, also known as the curve editor in other 3D software. And once you've added your poses, the keyframes in the timeline, which we did back there, the timeline, you'll also get keyframes here in your graph editor. See these keys? That's the keyframes also in the graph editor. And it's a super powerful way of polishing and editing. So for example, we can see there it's the Z-axis going up. So if we hit up arrow, we can see that this curve's mimicking Z, isn't it? If we move this Z up, the cube's moving up. If you go to update path, you'll see there. If you pull this tangent handle there, just click and drag on it and put it update path, you'll see you've created more hang time, for example, on the cube. So this cube goes up and it hangs in the air for longer than it did before. If you put that shorter, you'll see that it doesn't hang in the air. So tangent handles, very powerful way of editing an animation. You might want this cube to move in a linear fashion. So you can select here your different channels. You can hide stuff. So that's very useful. If you hide X and Y, you're only working on Z. You're not confused then. So if you can select it by dragging over a whole curve or selecting all the keys. generally select the whole curve. If you now right click, you can change the tangent handle. You can also change an interpolation mode. So Bezier is best for organic animation, and in general you should use Bezier all the time. But linear, if you click that, that's going to move in a linear fashion now. It'll just go straight to the key and then straight, so a straight line. If you update path, it's spacebar. That's moving in a linear fashion now. No hang time, just straight up, straight down. So as I say, you do that by right clicking and changing the interpolation mode. Constant will just give you a step, it's known as a stepped curve. Sometimes good for blocking in animation, stepped, but in general you'll use Bezier. So if you now select, so it's the eye, if you now look at your X for example, and you go into Y, delete that, update the path, you've got rid of the key at 13. So in the X location, it's just moving in an X fashion there. Select the curve, right click, linear. So that's just moving straight now. What I mean by that is it's not slowing out. So this curve slows out and slows in, which is principle number 6 of the 12 principles again, which is slow in and slow out. And I'll keep going on, but that is the most important thing, and it's in the PDF. It's principles like squash and stretch, anticipation, overlap, timing, exaggeration, arcs, the 12 principles of animation. So that is the basic graph editor and how it works. These curves kind of mimic what is happening to that cube, and yet I haven't rigged, as I said earlier, I haven't rigged this cube. If this was for a game or a film, you'd have your bone, you'd obviously parent your mesh to your bone and paint the weight like we did before in the last session, weight paint. But I'm just showing the quick basic principles here of animation. It's not going into a game engine, it's just being used in Blender, so just to show the basic principles. So that's basically how you go about setting keys, that is, on just a basic cube. You'll set the basic workflow is you set your keyframes, you'll set in-betweens, which is in between your keyframes, and then you'll add breakdowns then, further ones. It's keyframe, breakdown, in between is a general workflow. Your keyframe, there's your key, breakdown, and then in betweens, and that's how it works with animation. Keyframes, breakdowns, and in betweens, known as blocking. At first, blocking in your poses, in betweening, breakdowns, or breakdowns and in betweening. So that's a brief outline of animation. So I think what we'll do now, we'll try and actually create a few simple animations on the Minecraft character and R2-D2. So let's hide that cube. Bring that down. I think what we'll do now is we'll file, append. I believe it was part 3B, collection. No, it wasn't that. File, append. Was it collection 2? No, that was a previous one. Oh, sorry, yeah, it was part 4 rigging, wasn't it? Collection. Let's get the Minecraft character in to start. And what I quickly want to discuss before we do any animation is an industry practice known as the control system. So you've got your rig set up, and there's your bones. But it's not really good practice to animate that bone as such. So what you can do is you'll add an empty, for example, a circle. And then if you select your bone and go into pose mode, viewport display. Sorry, it's your bone. You select your actual bone. There, bone. Viewport display. What you can do is you can grab your picker and grab your empty. And now this circle has replaced the bone. You can change the scale, for example, of that. If you simply drag in there, you've changed. You can rotate, find the correct axis, let's say 90, and translate. And you can move that into the position the bone was. So that's known as a control, that is, which has replaced your bone. And you can change the colour as well. I like to work on the principle of red is right, screen right, remember, screen right. Left I like to be lime, and then the body, B, I like to be blue. So what you'd do is you'd change all these bones for what I've just done. It's empty. There. Select your picker, click on your empty, and you replace all these bones with a control system. And I find that's the best way to work. I probably won't do it for R2, but I might change the colour of the bone. It doesn't matter, you don't have to do it. Let's have a drink. But it's a more professional way of working by using a control to animate. You're now in pose mode. So the control moves the same way as the bone. Let's go into our timeline. Let's just knock auto key off for now. We'll hide that empty. So the empty comes there, the control. And what I generally like to do is add a new collection. I'll call that control, and I'll move it in to there and hide it for now. It's not in the way. It's generally a good way to work that. So there's our Minecraft character. Let's set this to say 120, which is, let's just have 100, which is just over 4 seconds. So let's pose this Minecraft character then. So what we can do is, there's our armature. So what you generally do to animate is you'll select your armature, you'll go into pose mode, and let's start moving it around. You use your move, rotate and scale in general. So let's go on to auto key then, being as we're animating. You can use local or global. Generally global's good for blocking. So what should we do with this character then? Well, let's move that up a bit. Let's just have him standing then. Let's just have him standing for now. So we're using rotate just to have him standing flat on the ground. And what you can do to help you with that, if you go into object mode and go to add mesh plane, scale that plane, and it's scaled at the origin, you've got a floor then that he's standing on. You can see where his feet are. Remember, don't move it in object mode. You're in object mode there. You want to move it, you want to select it and move it in pose mode. So remember, everything was parented to the torso, wasn't it? So when we move that torso, the feet move, or the legs, which is not an 100% correct system. But this isn't like, what I mean by that is, remember the IK we discussed? If you move your root on an IK character, your feet won't move, but obviously this was just a basic rig. So when you move your torso there, your legs will move. But what we could have him leaning back, couldn't we? We could move this leg back a little bit. So it's not exactly the same as... Doesn't matter if you move that, by the way. You can just move your legs to suit. But let's have him leaning back a little bit. Let's have this arm, say, down there. Let's move that a bit so it's not off balance. In general, you'll want a line of action in animation. And you don't want it to be off balance, as it were. So the weight there, he was leaning back so he'd fall. But now, although it's not perfect, his weight's distributed better like that. Doesn't look like he's going to fall, for example. So keep rotating round, look at all angles. Let's have the head maybe like that. Sort of tilt it a little bit. Let's bring this arm forward here. And he's cutting into the head a bit there, which doesn't really matter that much, but... So, I don't know if you remember them kind of... I remember seeing it on a program in China. It's like a waving... It's a waving dog. I'll tell you what is wrong there. You're not working on the correct term. His eyes are there, aren't they? So his eyes at the front. And that's why I thought he was leaning back. He's leaning forward, his eyes are at the front there. So let's bring that there. Let's just make it right. Let's have him leaning back there. Let's have that there. Forward a little bit. Let's bring that torso up a touch. Let's have the head tilting a bit. Generally, you'll want a little head tilt on a character. Just so he's got a little bit more interest to tilt. If he was a proper character, you'd go for known as a contrapposto kind of pose like that. Let's just bring that out. Just a touch there. Let's bring that arm back. So that's the basic, there's our basic pose there. And what we can do now is we can have this character kind of waving at us. A bit like those China, it was like a Chinese dog kind of thing. So if we bring this up here, there. And as I say, in general, all this control here, you could have like maybe a circle for the head. That really, to be perfect, that would be like a cube. Really, there, that control. And those legs might be a cube, really, all the way down. And that's generally a cube kind of shape. But that just gives you an idea. And because I wasn't looking at I forgot I'd add in an eye. Remember I said left line. Left for line, red for right. Let's go back into our bone properties. And let's set that to a lime colour. And I know people might think, oh, you're a bit of a perfectionist, but yeah, that's how I like to work. Left line, right red, blue for the bottom. So he's in a little pose there, isn't he? We've set our keyframes. If we press play, he'll stay in that pose. So what we can do now, that's our keyframe. If we drag over all these controls, let's hit I just to make sure they're all keyed, all channels. We can select that, Control C, we go to that final frame, Control V. Now we've made that more clean by having our first keyframe the same as our last keyframe, because we're going to try and create a loop here, looping animation. So when you're creating a looping animation, looping, also known as a cycle. Obviously you got run cycles, walk cycles. You'll have the first frame, the same as the last frame. And then what you do then, is you truncate or get rid of your last keyframe. So you've got 99. You have 1 and 100 as your keyframes. If you knock it back to 99, or whatever you're working on, like a walk cycle's 24 frames, so you'd have 1 and 25, it'd be the same, and you'd knock it back to 24, you'll get an 100% loop then. So what are we going to loop here? Well, let's loop this arm waving then. So, not sure about the speed. Should we try maybe 15? See how it looks. So we're in auto key. Let's move this arm down a bit. So using your arrows, it's going from 1 to 15. And then Control C on 30, Control C, Control V. So you've got 1 and 30 are the same. 15 is down, so that's your 2 keyframes there. Key there, key there. Back to your key. These are going to be your breakdown keys. There's your frames. So what we can do to adjust the timing, same as in the dope sheet, you can do it in the timeline. Best to select them all, even though you only keyed that. Work cleanly. Should we try 12 and say 24? That feels a bit better, doesn't it? So let's say I, all channels, arrow key up, I, all channels. Let's bring our timeline up there. So we want to keep repeating this. So what we can do, we can drag over all 3 of them, put copy, paste, paste, paste. Now we've got him waving in a loop until we get to there. So what we can do, we want our first frame there, copy, last frame, yeah, we're already on that. We want to delete that one, and we'll nudge these along visually. They look quite even. You can do this in the dope sheet as well. You go into your dope sheet. Generally, a lot of animators use a dope sheet for changing timing. So let's say, oops, let's drag over there. Shift click to drag. If you miss one, if you hold shift, you'll have your previous selection plus whatever you had. What's that, 8800, yeah. So if we now press space on that, we've got a perfect loop. So he's kind of waving, isn't it? Because we're only starting basic. That's your looped wave. So let's grab that control. Generally, you'll select all your controls and you'll go into the graph editor. View, remember, you don't want to see the cursor, and we only want to see the selected keyframes. That's 2 important things. So you can see now that you've got values here. And it's on the x-axis, so x. Because we've got quaternion there, it's also keyed a bit of z. So really, you should be setting it to XYZ Euler. It's not super important, but it's best to set it to Euler before you key anything. But we can leave that for now. But what we can do, if we delete Z and hide the others, we only use the x-axis. Rotation X. See there, X. That was the only axis we used. So if you select that curve, go into modifiers, you also get different settings here. If you go into cycles, you could extend your timeline frames to infinity, thousands, whatever, and it'd loop all the way. It'd just keep looping. And that's generally used for games and walk and run cycles. So we've got our character waving. You can create a bit of variation here by pulling these handles. Let's not have him go down so far there, but a bit further up there. Not so far. Not so far. A bit further. A bit less. If you drag over the handles, you can adjust it so it stays at the top or bottom a little bit more, just to create a bit of variation in the wave. Very subtle to see for the eye, but it's just so it's not 100% exactly the same. And it's a visual thing, really. You'll just tweak it, have a little look. That seems a bit hanging for a bit too long there. So you can also move the keys in the graph editor just simply by dragging them along. Just simply drag on the knot or the dot is what they generally refer to. So that's just a simple way how you go about keying things on your controls. And if you remember, let's just have a drink. I'm sure we created a little shape key for these eyes. So if you come into object mode, so you've come out of your rig, click on the head. Did we create a shape key? Yes, we did, didn't we? So remember, we can key these shape keys. You can set up a control as well, which I'll show you further on down the line. But we can key this, so he has a little blink as well, halfway through. You broke it up a little bit. So if you click on your shape key blink there, and then you click that dot, which is there, you've created a keyframe on that shape key. You're animating this now. So go into your timeline, key, value, blink. So there's your key. Let's just have it say 50 frames. So if you copy and paste, Control C, Control V, that value stays the same between frame 1 and 50. Let's just have a cartoony blink over 4 frames. So go 1, 2. Now if we set that value to 1, notice he's blinking there. And you want to come out of the blink. Now let's go forward another 2 frames. Copy paste. He's out of the blink now. And you have to have auto key enabled to change values here. Auto key. So you make sure you create this key there. Most things in Blender are keyable, including your shape keys. So there's your blink. And he comes out of it. Just for cleanliness. Let's have that as the last frame. So if you come out of wireframe, we'll add materials to this in the future. But there's a little blink in there, isn't there, halfway through? It's waving and blinking. So that's a very basic way of how you go about animating in Blender. The general workflow: select your armature, go into pose mode, which is there. Select your armature, pose mode. Then you'll set your keyframe or frames by selecting the control or the bone. Auto key or I to insert. And once you've added your various keyframes and your breakdowns and your in-betweens, you'll move into your graph editor then. Graph editor. And you'll adjust your tangents handles, your tangents on your curves. Very, very important. Animation curves. They're available in all 3D software, animation curves. And you'll notice, because we adjusted the timing on this arm, you've got staggered keys there. So it means that you've got a key there, say on 52, like a key set, but then that could be on 51. That's the way that'll happen in animation when you adjust timing on just the one control. You'll get more keyframes. So yeah, that's a basic animation of a Minecraft character waving. So what we'll do now, I think, is I'm going to do the bouncy ball in a future one with the squash and stretch and stuff, unless I've got time at the end to quickly do it. So there's our Minecraft character, a looping cycled animation. If you go into your graph editor, you can see your curves. If you select all of them, you've got many curves. So if you can imagine a game character with hundreds of controls, this looks like a, spaghetti mess kind of thing with all your different things happening there. So it's generally best to work by isolating, locking stuff, things like that, working on one control at a time. Generally, in a proper character, you'll work on your root first. You'll get a solid root or core, which is the hips, basically. Then you'll move on to I generally get a solid core, hips, then I'll move on to my legs, in my arms, and then overlapping the head, things like that. But we're going to get further into that a lot later down the line. This is just beginning. So there's your looping Minecraft character waving and blinking. So what we'll do now is we'll hide that, and we'll go to File, Append, and we'll get R2. There. And we'll look into creating a basic animation on R2 then. So let's just keep it at 100 for now. Actually, that might be a little bit too short. So remember, timeline. Let's just set it for 200. You can change that as much as you want this. And you can drag in there as well. You can drag in there to change your frames. So what we'll do is we'll set some controls for R2. So we'll add an empty cube and we'll move that into the control and we'll hide it. And that was our circle. Always best to rename F2 cube. So let's say armature pose mode. Let's go into the bone picker cube. Now that body's controlled by the cube. Set it to blue, body blue. And you use these settings here to set the scale you want. Let's translate it up. So say 1. Let's scale it a bit in X. There's our body control. There you go, body. Let's select our leg. Let's go for cube again. Let's set the scale to drag over all of them, set it to 0.3, see what that gives you. Let's set the X to 0.1. Get an X to 0.1. Translate it down 1. We'll scale it in Y. Then move it down a bit more by clicking the arrows. Let's move it to 1.5 by typing in. Let's try 1.7. There you go. There's a control for the leg. You want it red. Remember, red, right, body blue. Want this to be line again. Cube. It's going to be the same values as this side. So that was 0.1, 0.5, 0.1. 0.1, 0.5, 0.1, and that was moved to 1.7. We want it as line for left. There's the controls for the legs and body. And then if you're not going to set controls, at least set the colour. So it's not just a default bone in the middle of the that's more on the right side there, so let's set that to red. We could set that to orange, which is a bit different. So that's the control system, isn't it? We're in pose mode. Yeah. So there is the controls for R2. So what animation should we do? Are we keeping it simple? So let's select everything and hit I. We've set that to XYZ Euler now, instead of quaternion. So that's a lot more cleaner now. Remember that. Best to set your bone to XYZ Euler. So what animation should we create? Should we just have him move forward a bit? So we'll have him start, say, back here. Let's hide our controls here. Let's go into overlays and let's hide the relationship lines so they're not in the way. So he's starting back here, R2. And this won't probably be looped, this won't. He's just going to move forward. So he's starting back here. Let's have him come forward to probably, let's say about 70, about 2, nearly 3 seconds. Let's select all of them, press I, so we got a attribute on it all. Let's bring him forward. He comes to about there, so before we press play now, moving forward a bit. Down arrow and up arrow to go between your keys. So when he gets to there, he'll stay in that position. So select all your controls. Control C in the timeline to 90. Control V. So he comes forward. Stops for a minute. Then we could have his head spin, couldn't we? He could spin a couple of times his head. So let's try 130. Select all our controls, I. Select our head control, rotate, and let's rotate it 360. Let's just have it spin once, keep it simple. So his head rotates 360. Remember, you can click I in the timeline. So select all them dots or knots. Control C, Control V. Let's knock that back to about 150 by dragging over them and pulling them back. And then say at 165, select them all, I. Let's have this in antenna come up. So move, antenna comes up. And as the antenna reaches the top, copy, paste it to 80. So antennas come up, I, arrow, copy paste, antenna stays up. Let's just have the eye, let's put that to 220 for now. Let's just have the eye move, so we can grab this eye. He's on 180, let's say his eye just moves over there. And on 200, his eye moves to there. So select all your controls. I to keep it clean, arrow to move to that, I to keep it clean. And at 210, I again. We want to go back with the eye, excuse the pun, so copy, paste, his eye's back to there. So that's just a very quick and dirty blocked in animation, that is. Let's just set that to 500 so he stays in his final pose and doesn't go floating back. So let's just have a look what that gives us on a quick and dirty animation. Let's go to start and press play. So he moves forward. His head spins around. Antenna comes up and his eye moves. So there's a quick and dirty animation with R2. So that's blocked in. So now we've blocked that in, we can go into the graph editor next. So dope sheet, timeline, graph editor. Remember what I said about working with the root first? The most important. That's your root control on this character. That's your body. Do it delete on your numpad. Or center yourself on that root. So what happened then when we set these keys? Well, you can see there that the body is moving in the z-axis. If you select that curve, it'll be highlighted in yellow there. Select the curve, comes up in yellow. Location. Oh, gotta have a drink. Remember to drink plenty of water when you're working. Important. So, where was we? We're only on the Z, aren't we? So why not just hide all these? Less confusing, isn't it? And we can see that he moves forward. Generally, the character anticipate backwards. This is rule number 2 in the 12 principles. Is known as an antic or anticipation. Antic, a lot of animators call it. So he should move back a bit really, but he's a robot. But let's just do it to show the concept of it. Select your curve and press I. You can insert a keyframe. You only want it on the selected channel. So select that. And you've got a knot there. If you bring that knot down, just drag it down, you'll see that he goes backwards, doesn't he, before he goes forward. So he's anticipating there. Known as an anticipation. And it's obviously very rough because I'm just trying to get the concept down in the time we've got. 1, 2, 3. So let's drag the timing out a bit. I'm pressing Control and middle mouse here and I'm zooming into the curve. If you select the knot and right click and go to handle type and go to free, that'll break the tangent handle that will. So you can adjust both sides. So it'll slow out as he goes back. And it'll slow out as he moves forward. So Control and middle mouse to look at your curve. So he's anticipated there, hasn't he? So you've incorporated a principle of animation. Look, he's anticipating backwards. Generally, anticipation means if you're going to go left, you'll generally do a little movement to the right. Test it out when you're walking, and you'll see what I mean. When you're going to walk off somewhere, you'll anticipate that by going the opposite way slightly. So he's anticipated. As I say, he generally probably wouldn't. He wouldn't really as a It's more of an organic thing, anticipation. So R2 probably wouldn't, but so he's very slightly anticipating there. Look. That feels a bit better. Very slightly. And what you do, you mess around with your tangent handles. So you'll work in your graph editor on the bottom of the screen, and you'll see your viewport in the top. For years and years, I worked with my graph editor on my second monitor or third monitor, but now I just prefer to use a one monitor, basically because I've got a film or something on the other monitor and Discord on the other one, so a bit naughty really. So yeah, he anticipates and he comes, like moves, and so he slows in that curve. He's slowing into the movement. I've got to speed up a bit here, so I'm on 1 hour and 10 minutes. So you could go to I again, hit I, only selected channels. You could slow in more. So he slows in more. Bring that down. Bring that down a touch. Then that. And then that. Zoom into your curve. And then so he's slowed in even more there. And you want to look for a pleasing curve shape, really, as well. You can pull the tangent handles to adjust it. Oh yeah, he's slowed in. So that's our main movement of the route. Moving forward, slowing in. Remember, if you select your route and hit delete on the numpad, you'll zoom into your control. So what did he do then? He moved his head around, and that was controlled by this control here, the head control. So we named it head. Always best to name everything. So when we animated that, what did it do? Well, it was the rotation, wasn't it? We rotated it. You can see that in Y there. Look, Y, 180 degrees. Y there. So we only need to work with Y. So let's just hide the others by clicking the eye. So he spins around. If you select, you can select that curve, right click, interpolation mode linear, moves in a linear way. This is generally how robots move, but let's set it to Bezier so it moves a bit more organic. Looks better really, that. How his head moves around. And these dots here, I like to just delete them. Select the dot, delete, select the dot, delete. If the curve's flat, like that, it means nothing's happening. There's just nothing happening. You have to see movement in a curve for there to be animation. So obviously that's moving there, isn't it? Your keys there. But everywhere else, there's no keys. So it's a 50-50 thing again. Some people just leave the keys because it doesn't matter. If you want to be super clean and delete the keys. So his head moves. What we could do is add something known as an overshoot. Now, if you go to say frame 137, select that knot, Control C, Control V, and then go to the middle and press I, only selected, and move that a little bit. You'll see that that curve is moving there. You don't really want that. So the way around that is to select that, go to handle type 3, And you've broke the tangent. There, it's known as breaking a tangent. That. So he comes round and he overshoots just a little bit and then goes back. And by doing that, it's not as linear. You don't really want... I'm contradicting myself a bit robotically, because robots do move linear, but that feels a bit better to me. By having a little overshoot. And now you can see why this curve editor or graph editor is so powerful. Because you can just add keys to it and just work on the channel that you need. So I've added a little overshoot there and it goes back to the normal position. So that's the head spinning. Then his antenna comes up, doesn't it? So what bone was that? It's there. Let's open our channels up. Control middle mouse. And zoom in to our curves. We can see, if we select it, it's the Y location. So let's hide the rest. Let's look at our Y location. Let's delete these keys that are not used. And I think that probably moves a bit too fast, doesn't it, that? His antenna. So what we can do there, we can Control C and Control V, and we could select that and hit delete. And by doing that, we've created more time, haven't we? So we're messing with the timing. We've created more time. So if we go to there on the timeline, simply by dragging on it and press space, his antenna comes up a little bit slower. And then we could do what we've done for the head. We could Control C, Control V, move that to there, press I, only selected channels. We don't want this curve to move. So we select 3, which has broke the tangent. Move that up a touch. Now he's got a slight little overshoot there on his antenna. So move your tangent handle. I think the final thing was the eye. So because we're running out of time, I'm going to have to show you in later lessons for that. But you can create a bone constraint and control known as a damp track, and you move the control to move the eye. But there's nothing wrong with moving it like that for this quick test. And it looks like we rotated it in all 3 axes there. So we have X, Y and Z. Because if you remember, if you rotate in the middle of the gimbal, it affects all 3 axes. So how all 3 have moved. Which doesn't matter. It's generally you want to be on one axis to avoid gimbal lock, but so his eye just moves around, doesn't it? And then moves back. Let's just mess around with the angles just to tidy it up a little bit. We can't go much further now. We could move that. If you drag on that and hold X, you can move a key. So you could have each axis hit at a different time, wouldn't you? And you got a little bit of settle in. Looks alright, doesn't it, like that? You've moved the curve along a bit. So drag and then hold X, and you'll only move in that axis then. So it looks like the Z settles, then the Y, then the X. A little bit more organic. And obviously if you go to the end of the timeline, he's going to move back there because it's not a loop. But what we might do further on down the line is moving backwards. It will go back to his start position, which is what I'll probably do. But we haven't got time for that now. So if we play that animation. Right, apologies, someone at the door, shopping turned up. Just a look I'd have. So I'll just do a film fade or something back into the video and be alright. Yeah, so where was we? I mean, he moves forward, doesn't he? And what I've done, I've adjusted the timing a little bit just by simply just dragging stuff in the timeline or the dope sheet, so it's not as contrived kind of thing. So what I mean by that is he's still coming to a stop, and the head, just as before he stops, his head moves, and as his head's moving, his antenna starts coming up. So it's not happening sort of one thing stop, one thing stop, one thing stop. It's happening kind of at the same time. So antenna up, eye moves around. So that's the basic animation for R2, really, that. If you go into your timeline, go to the start. Moves along, head spins, antenna up, and the eye moves. So that's it, really. Basic intro to animation and setting keys. I'm just going to use this last few minutes because I'm on about an hour and 23 now, so I've only got 7 minutes left. I'll keep it under an hour and a half. A few other things that are useful. If you've got something in the graph editor, I believe it is, you go to the key channel, you've got something called a Euler filter, which is useful if things might get something known as gimbal lock. But obviously them 3 rotations are fine, but sometimes you can get axes twisting around over each other. So if you select them and go to channel, Euler filter, that generally untwists and untangles axes, and you don't get gimbal lock. Next thing is, remember, when you key something in Blender, you go into the dope sheet in your action editor, you've got an action created there, and that's really useful if you're working with game engines, because Unity, for example, imports that, and you can set up controls and stuff in, and animators in game engines. So yeah, dope sheet. If you go to action editor, you'll see your action there, so you can name that R2 forward, for example. And if you click the shield, you've stored it then. You'll see that F on there, see the F? That means you've stored it. And if you push down, it takes it into the NLA editor, so stores it. It's a non-linear animation. No need to go in depth about that now, but you select your rig, pose mode, select your control. You've got, as I say, you've stored it there by the F, and if you click the shield, it stores it as well. So that's your action editor. So you could create another animation there. You could close that and click new, create a new action. You've got different actions, say the Minecraft one. We never went into the action editor there, but you could create F for that, which is known as a fake user, and you've stored it then. So yeah, that's the action editor. We've discussed controls, which are used instead of the bones. Drivers. You've got a driver editor, which is another way of kind of one value affects another value. We'll go into it in the future, drivers. It's another part of animation, drivers are. I think I've got to go into it in depth now with an intro. But you can create drivers in Blender. And I believe a lot of them are based on shape keys, really. Like you can create a shape key and then a control drives it for a blink, for example, instead of keying a shape key. So the final few minutes, I'm just going to discuss the 12 principles of animation, which are in the PDF. And these 12 principles of animation form the basis for any animation. I discussed a few of them as we was animating, doing the basic R2 animation. But the 12 principles of animation are basically squash and stretch, which I'm going to do with the ball in the future, but it means if you've got a ball, for example here, as this ball hits the ground, it'll squash like that. And as the ball comes up, it'll stretch. So that's squash and stretch. And it can also be used in faces. Like faces actually squash and stretch. So this head might squash down as anticipation on a cartoony one. And then stretch as it comes up. It happens in heads. Squash and stretch. If you're doing a jump, for example, the body might squash down like that. And as he jumps, the body will stretch. That's the first principle. Second principle is the anticipation, which is what we've done with R2, if you remember. Before he goes forward, he moves back a bit. That's your anticipation. Third principle of animation, staging. This is only simple, but you'd want to stage it in a way where you've set a camera up. So instead of it just being a silly, not silly, but simply moving linearly forward, you could set up staging so it's more pleasing. You've got some perspective to it. And it's not flat. The fourth principle is known as straight ahead and pose to pose. So straight ahead means you just key every frame, one after another. Pose to pose is you'll set a pose there, for example. Then you'll set another pose for the character there. It's pose to pose and straight ahead. Overlapping action is how something drags. So if this was to move forward, this tail would drag. As it comes to a stop, it'd go like that and it'd overlap. That's overlapping action. Slow in and out, we've done that with R2. So he slows in there. He slows out as he moves and then slows in. It's not a linear movement. Arcs. That's the way how something arcs around, as in a hand, like move and arc. Secondary action. That's something that happens as an action happens. A secondary might happen, a blink, for example. Timing. Done that with R2 a bit. Timing works like that. More frames, more action. Exaggeration. Instead of something being like that, could be like that, you're exaggerating the action. Solid drawing is a bit like staging. Solid drawing is, which is principle 11. Perspective. Then appeal, which is 12, makes sure something's appealing. Just doesn't look flat and linear for appeal. And that's basically the animation introduction. I want an hour and a half now, so it's a complex subject, animation. It takes a lot of years of practice, real labour of love. But the main steps involve creating keyframes, breakdowns, then going into your graph editor and adjusting and polishing. So that, guys, is going to be the animation lecture. And apologies for that last 10 minutes where I've had to do a fade or someone at the door. But be sure to download the PDF. Some nice nuggets of info in there. And I hope you enjoyed that one. And I'll see you in part 6, which I believe is unwrapping for part 6. So that was part 5, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, guys. Bye.